Mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you are. I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar presentation, The Risks of Separating UI/UX from Your Development Lifecycle. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. If you've been with us before, you know that we be a live Q&A after the presentation is completed. And we will get to as many questions as time allows. You simply navigate to the question area of the control panel, type in your question, hit submit, and we'll address them. Okay, secondly, this webinar is going to be available on demand on the sdtimes.com website, so you can share it, watch it over and over again, and play it back as often as you like. Anyway, so we've written quite a bit over the past year on UI/UX in SD Times, and we've been looking at the changes driven by customer demand for instant gratification, as well as changes in the interface itself, with AI-powered chatbots now being seen often as the first point of contact with a business. So here to talk about the importance of keeping UI/UX on pace with development is Amin Merdamati. He's the project manager with Logi Analytics. So take it away, Amin.
Perfect. Thank you, David. All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. As David mentioned, we are going to be talking about keeping your UI/UX in line with your development cycle and basically risks associated with, well, I guess with separating the two. So a little bit about myself. My name is Amin. I am a product manager here at Logi Analytics. I've been here for about 4.5 years or so. Prior to this, I was at Accenture. But today, we'll be taking a look at a few different topics here. Now, we'll start out with some common use cases. As a little bit of background, Logi Analytics, well, we're in the analytics space, so we'll be talking about some common analytic applications. We'll cover about Logi Analytics, who we are, what we do, and then we'll look at a few sample apps. So some how we built and how we deploy some of these applications. Finally, we'll get to our UI/UX approach internally and how this fits into our dev cycle. And as David mentioned, we'll wrap up with any questions. All right. So starting out with some of the use cases. So we are in the analytics space, but the applications that we look at are not always just your typical reports and dashboards. Now, I've broken the slide up on basically on two sides. On the left-hand side, we have some of those typical applications or use cases that we think about when we think of analytics or BI. You have your interactive dashboards, reports, you have departmental reporting. This could be things like marketing, sales, support or call centers, anything with data that needs some reporting. And you have also different types of people that you have to keep in mind, executives, directors, analysts, and how they're going to consume these reports. Now, specifically for Logi, we focus on what we call OEMs. These are other software companies who have data in their applications and they need a compelling way to expose them. So we have a slightly different set of requirements or needs or in use cases when we start deploying. Now, self-service analytics actually does apply to both, but in these cases, it's about giving the right set of capabilities to the right set of people. Mobile device compatibility, responsive design, working from desktop to browsers to mobile or tablet devices. But the other piece when it comes to embedding or OEM of analytic apps is integration and embeddability. So how do we connect to your data? How do we expose that in the app? How do we make it white labeled and look like a seamless part of the experience? And of course, deployment considerations. Does it scale with your application? Do we have seamless security? So things like single sign-on. When the user logs in, we shouldn't just send them to another tab that says analytics. We want it to be part of the experience. They don't have to log in again. It takes on the rights, roles, and permissions they have already. So those are some of the use cases that we typically deploy into. Over the rest of the presentation, we'll look at a few examples of those and how UI/UX plays a role when we're taking into account these different applications. Now, as Logi Analytics, we have really one main platform. We call it our Logi Info platform. This is a application development platform for analytics. It is a little bit different than what we think about as like out of the box or desktop analytic suites. When we think of it like desktop or analyst products, you have like obviously Excel, but you have Tableau, Power BI. But we are a little bit different than that. If you think of them as one side of the spectrum of something out of the box, you plug it in, work with the data, and the other side, if you're a software company, you could roll your own. You can build your own charts and graphs. We fit somewhere in between. We have a model where you're able to rapidly develop and build very, very customizable analytic apps, but at the same time, it's a lot faster time to market. We use a concept we call elemental design. Think of these as pre-built building blocks or like Legos that you stack together to build up a very custom application that fits your needs. Now, a few other things, just again, some background about who we are and what we do. It is a fully web-based platform. We deploy in the cloud, on premise. It's very flexible as far as how it scales and is rolled out. Connect to a ton of different data sources. And that final last piece, we do again sell to primarily other software companies that take our platform and use the tools inside of it to enhance their analytic capabilities as part of their app. All right, so with that, let's take a look at a few example applications. So a lot of the applications you're going to see incorporate many of the really UI UX designs and concepts we'll talk about a little bit later. And you see what this means as far as taking those ideas and making sure that through and through, they're integrated into your application design. So the first one we'll take a look at is a industry-specific application. Now, we do actually have this up on our website as a sample app. You can actually click into it, play around with it, see how this looks. When this goes out, the presentation will have a link into it. But as I mentioned, this is designed for a very specific use case. In this case, hospital readmissions. Now, when we think about the end user of an application like this is probably a nurse or a doctor, somebody inside of a hospital itself. This is not an analyst. They don't want to have to go diving for the data. We want to be able to give them an easy experience, something quite managed, where they have some interactivity. Maybe the filter's on the left-hand side, they can click on it, but then it easily serves them up the data that they're interested in. Now, this application also goes one step further. It's not just about your selecting a filter, a location, a hospital group, and looking at the data. It's the ability to drill into that data, go find underlying information, and actually interact with it. So on one side, there is a lot of value to being able to see some of the readmission data, but you also add even more value by allowing the person, once they're there looking at it, they can update it. They can either make corrections, they can add in patient notes, add in or log another interaction with the patient, whether it's a visit, a call, a follow-up, but it's all in the same app. Within a managed approach, it's a little bit more than just, hey, here's a chart. It allows me to dive in and actually work with that data. All right, so with that, we'll take a look at another application. This actually goes similar to the other end of the spectrum. Instead of highly interactive, we call this like our large format dashboards. These are typically things you might see on, say, like a call center, a sales floor. Our sales team actually has it up there looking at different KPIs and metrics as the day goes on. Manufacturing plants, there's another great place where we see these often. But oftentimes, what they are doing is trying to show a high-level view of a lot of information in a very, very easy to consume manner. But again, when we think about the experience, we have to understand how someone's going to use a dashboard like this. This is not something that's designed to be that interactive. It's sitting up on the wall. Nobody can click on it. They can't change filters. They can't drill down. So we have to say, here's the data. Here's the KPIs and metrics that's important for the person to be able to get their job done. And maybe it's not only just real time, but it's multiple sources coming in from, multiple machines from the assembly lines in the plant floor, or external sources, maybe weather information is coming in, social media, sentiment analysis, anything else that might relate to the data, the job that we're doing and how we need to react. Now, again, going on to another sample or application here, we can take a look at this one we call it facilities management. Now, in this app, I'm not too concerned about data or the visualizations we're using. But what I want to address here is again about how somebody's going to consume the end result. So the first one was more of a desktop experience. We clicked around, we were able to interact with it at a certain level. The second one was almost no interactivity. It's sitting up there on a wall. But this one is we start realizing we have to take into account different types of devices. So we have desktop, tablet, mobile devices. We not only want the content to rearrange, but we also want it to, resize. We also want it to be able to rearrange based on the real estate available. And we want to make sure that as we build out things like KPIs, metrics, or charts, that this is something that you can use on a cell phone. If I'm using my iPhone versus my desktop, I don't have the same fine-grained control I have with a mouse. I'm not going to be able to click on small buttons or filters and work with it. I need bigger icons. I need things that maybe that fit a different aspect ratio. But despite that, I want to be able to build it once and have people to have a pleasurable experience no matter where they're going to be consuming that content. Now, again, going through some different sample applications and what we build and how these UI concepts start coming to light in real apps. We have another sample we did around the oil and gas space. Now, some of this information, instead of your traditional just bar charts, line charts, or pie graphs, we start looking at some geographic information. In this case, we want to see where our wells are, maybe color-coded based on the status or of the well itself, maybe production levels coming out of each areas. But again, same levels of interactivity. This is still quite managed. I click on a well, and I'm able to drill into it. We've added in some very unique visuals in this one. We have this card flip view where we can actually go through those different wells on the fly, being able to look at this content. But it was something working with the users to understand, again, like what makes sense for the data and what gives a pleasurable experience for that final end user. Now that can be taken really as far as you want to go. This comes with some of the flexibility, but also something you have to look at your data and your use case. We did another application around in the telco space where we're looking at quality of service metrics, and we're also doing like customer support and whatnot. But each of these cases have different sets of visuals that we can integrate into an application. This could be third-party content, whether we make it or not. You can actually add in your own ones that make sense for that use case. In this one, when we're talking about geographic data, we had to add in not only just like your typical states, regions, or markers, we're adding in custom cell coverage ranges. So you're able to drill into the map, look at those different areas, see the quality of service in each one, maybe also look at sentiment. Maybe people complaining on Twitter, I can't seem to get a phone call through or something else. Do some sentiment analysis of that. Drill into those individual areas and start looking at some of that real-time data as it comes through. But again, it all really depends on the use case. When we build an application, you have to understand what is the best way to display the data, how do people typically expect to see the data, like, and what level of interactivity, devices, all these things kind of build up into how you're going to build the application from the ground up. Now let's talk a little bit about the UI UX approach as a whole. We looked at some examples. So we'll talk about user experience and interface design that we do here at Logi and how this ties into these analytic apps as a whole. Now, as a product organization, our main goals are allowing you guys to be able to build effective applications. Now, in that, we think of these four main goals or targets of what we're trying to hit. Obviously, when we're building analytics on data, we do want it to be insightful. So we're building or displaying it in a way that makes sense, but also how we deliver it. In context and in one place are actually closely tied to each other. In one place is about, instead of having to go to a separate application, the analytics are exposed in line with tools and platforms or pages that they're using today, without having to go to like somewhere place for analytics. One example I like to use, just because most people have familiarity with it, is something like kayak.com. You go on there and you're searching for a flight. You don't think like, oh, I need to go to the analytics tab. No, right there on the left-hand side, you see prices, flight times. You're able to filter on that, you're able to drive the content you're looking at. Now, that's analytics, but you're getting it inside the page or within the context of where you're working. Now, the last piece here is personalized. Each person likes to look at data a little bit differently. They have different goals, things that they're interested in, or each organization has different values of things that they want to see. A CEO might want to see data one way versus an analyst might want to see it another way. So while you are giving them content that's out of the box, it's very important to allow them to customize and tailor that to what makes sense for them. So maybe they want a blue chart, somebody else wants a green. They want it filtered one way, they want it larger on the left-hand side, they want to switch these around. And instead of having to come back to you and pick those requests every time, you want them to be able to say, I want my personal view in this manner. Now, as we come into like personalization and ways we roll this out, we've broken this down into these three main personas. Now, this screen, we call this our spectrum of self-service analytics. Now, it is a spectrum. It is sort of a continuous range. We've broken into three main personas, but a typical user is not going to distinctly fall in one bucket or another. They're probably going to have traits of each of these different types in varying quantities. On the left-hand side, we have what we call a consumer. This is a person that's looking for a managed or very defined experience. This might be, a line worker that wants to just see the KPIs or metrics that they're looking at, or maybe even like a CEO. CEO wants to log in and get the information very quickly that they need. They don't want to have to go diving for it. Now, outside of that, we have creators. Instead of just looking at the data and consuming what you've given them out of the box, these guys are a little bit more savvy. They might know what they want to build, and they're going to want tools to be able to add to the content that you've created for them. So this is where some of the self-service items come into play. They might want to select some data. They want to build up some new charts or reports and either just use that for themselves or possibly also distribute that across the rest of the organization or their team. Now, all the way to the right, now closely related to creators, but distinctly different persona, is what we call an analyst. These guys are typically quite tech savvy. They're very familiar with the data. And instead of managing that experience, these guys want basically all the bumper rails turned off. They want the ability to go into that data, slice and dice it any way they want. These guys are looking for that 16th KPI. They might change the way that their organization is run. If this analyst group, if they don't have the capabilities they need, they will typically ask for a data dump, a CSV export, and try to use this in a different tool that's outside of the application. Our goal as a analytics platform company, we want to give you guys the tools so that you're able to not only address all those different UI, UX experiences, but to make sure you're giving the right set of tools to each of these different personas to keep them inside your app. Now, every year we do what we call our State of Embedded Analytics report. This is a little bit of survey and research that we do across not only our customers, but just the analytics industry as a whole. Ultimately, what we find out is that users want analytics. The majority of your users do want tools to be able to work and see their data. Now, the other problem that we've realized, even in 2017, we're getting roughly about only just 21% of users are actually leveraging those tools that are being given to them today. Now, the question is why? How come so many people want it, but so few people are actually using the tools that are being given to them? What we've found out is it comes down to a few different things, but ultimately ties back to that user experience. This could be that it's disjointed. It's not in line with the context of where they're working. Or maybe they don't like the experience. It's too complex or maybe too simple. It's not just about, did I give them the right bar chart? It's about, did I give the right level of capability to the right type of user? Again, going back to those different personas we were talking about before, is like, A CEO doesn't want to dig and dive for the data. They want to be able to get the data very, very quickly. Whereas the other side, your analyst doesn't want to just be served up some information and KPIs. They want to be able to control, tweak, analyze, find new trends and patterns inside the data of that application. And these are all people that are probably using your app. So it's about making sure you get the right level of capability, giving it to them in the context of it, and making sure you're addressing all those different needs within that app. Now, this is what we actually get to more or less my first point here. Applications require good UI UX. So UI UX is essential providing meaningful analytic applications. Going back to how it's delivered, responsiveness, touch-friendly, customizable. These are just core requirements of modern applications. But when you take the UI UX into account, especially from inception, you're going to start promoting that user adoption. Again, what we're talking about a minute ago, we don't want them leaving the app. We want to keep the value here. You want them working within the context of the application that you have. So you want to keep them there. If you fail in giving them the right tools or the right level of it, their first instinct is going to be leaving the application, whether it's going to a different tool to get the data they want, or taking a data dump and using external third-party content. But ultimately, as we look into this, you want it to be easier to maintain, reusability of that content across different pieces of the application, etc. Now, if we talk about Logi's approach to UI UX, one of the things we implemented several years back was we built a dedicated UI UX team. Not only did we build it, we also strive to give them the tools that they need to be successful. We integrated them within the teams. Now we're an agile organization, so we tie them into the sprint cycles, and it's actually a core part of the development cycle as a whole. But so now they're fully integrated end to end. I think my next slide. Here we go. As we integrated that team and started using it, we started with a design-first approach. It's about, again, taking all those concepts that we were talking about before, about how they consume it, how they use it, leveraging customer feedback through things like meetups and user groups, allowing us to do quick prototyping and user testing, taking all that feedback and tying it into our dev cycle as a whole. We actually ended up taking those UI UX teams and pairing them up with the rest of our sprint team. So our typical sprint team looks about 2 front-end developers, 2 back-end developers, 2 QA, and at least 1 UI UX designer. As we go through our software development lifecycle, I mean, these UI UX stories have the same prioritization as everything else. Those things happen early on. We have to understand about how somebody's going to consume this content and make sure that every step along the way is really building to that ultimate experience for that end user. And it goes beyond prototyping. This is not just here we mock this up and we have to go build along this. It's every step along the way. As we make changes from the engineering side, as we build out new features, each piece is done hand in hand with that UI team to make sure that goal is kept in mind. And again, as we go through it, every step along the way, even all the way through QA, we do house comprehensive UI reviews, understanding about, did we build what we were going out to initially build? And the UI is one thing as far as how it's laid out, but that experience, does this make sense for that end user? Now, and looking at those different personas, does each persona have the right set of tools, the right capabilities, or exposing in a way that makes sense for that person? All right. Now, and going back to those same pieces here. Now, I guess I talked a little bit about this already here, but it is a core component. We track it just like every other development milestone. These requirements, these pieces start from inception. Before we ever start writing code as an engineering organization, we have some of those designs mocked up. The other piece too is being able to iterate quickly, be able to get this in front of users and testing groups, be able to prototype it quickly, get that feedback, and integrate that into your final designs before you roll it out. But as key takeaways, UI UX needs to be a core part of the development process. It's an important piece, and honestly, every single decision you make early on will filter through and decide how well that's going to look when your users use it. Again, our main goal when we think about it from an analytics perspective and working with data, now oftentimes the software companies we're working with, analytics is not really their main goal, but the data has a lot of value. You want to keep them in the app. If they don't get what they're expecting, they will export it and use external tools. Now, the other piece too, keep in mind, analytic applications are really a lot more than just charts and graphs. It's about taking the data in that app and giving the value out to those users. So allowing them to work with it, gain insights that they wouldn't have had in other ways. And if you control it and stay within the rest of the application, you give them the most value possible. So with that, actually, I'll open it up to questions. Any questions you guys have so far?
Okay, couldn't unmute my phone there for a second. But the first question from one of our attendees is, you mentioned earlier in the presentation, talked about predictive accounting analysis, and they want to know what that means.
Sure. So we have a set of tools, actually, as far as our analytics platform as a whole. This could be ways of just visualizing data, accessing data, but we also have tools for data modeling. So this is where it comes into predictive. Now, it's not specifically just for accounting. I'm not 100% sure. If it said that in the slide, it should have just been predictive analysis as a whole. So as you have that data coming in, we also have tools and sets of tools. We are actually rolling out in the next few months a whole nother suite around how do you build models so that as you see sales or information coming in, you can do some projections, understand how different inputs relate to each other, and start helping out doing things like forecasting. But ultimately, as you're working with data, that's just part of a full suite of capabilities for analytics as a whole.
Okay, so a couple of people were curious about implementing this in agile practices. So one person wanted to know, is the pattern for this typically to build the user interface prototype in one sprint, then get buy-in for it, and then do a UI implementation in a later sprint? Is that the typical pattern?
Yeah, so they go quite hand in hand. Honestly, as we do it here, we mock it up. There is some circulation of the mock-ups in it. I guess that would be a sort of in one advance of the rest of the sprint of actually implementing it. Afterwards, we'll do some prototyping of tying some functionality into it to allow people to get their hands onto it, and then ultimately, lock that down, flesh it out as we get close to a final release.
Excellent. And the whole premise here was talk about not separating UI UX from the dev life cycle. One of the attendees want to know, so how do you actually integrate that into the development process?
Sure. Honestly, the biggest piece about this is really just keeping UI UX in mind as you go through the development process as a whole, and never forgetting it or pushing it off to a later piece of the dev cycle. How you do it is really going to be somewhat unique per organization of how you function and how your teams work together. From our standpoint, it really does come just to consistency, making sure there is a guy that's representing UI UX as part of that sprint team. So from the beginning to writing stories that are specifically for UI UX, to having those guys working alongside the rest of the development team, both front end and back end, to make sure that all your efforts align to driving towards the same end goal. How you do it, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but really the core piece is just that you think of, that you have it in mind, and don't stray away from that, from early on in the cycle all the way to finally deploying it out in production.
Very good. All right, and you talk about doing mock-ups of the UI, and one of the attendees wants to know what mock-up tools you use for that.
That's a great question, actually. I gotta go check out with some of our UI UX teams. We use everything from, we have one guy who's quite frankly just a wizard in PowerPoint that he can make some stuff into. Now, I don't recommend that as your mockup tool. We're trying to get him onto, more standardized things, but it could be anything. I gotta actually just double check. I know we were switching around some different tools and see what we're using today.
Okay. Just wanted to remind people that if they do have a question for Amin, to type it into the interface now, and as I had said earlier, we'll get to as many as time will allow. Okay, so while we're waiting for another question, perhaps you would share with us, one or two key takeaways from the presentation. There's a lot of information that you put out there. If there are one or two things you would like attendees to take away, what would they be?
Sure. So I guess really the three main ones would be, as you're building apps, like the data has a lot of value inside of it. So exposing it, ultimately, almost every application today, in some degree, is an analytic app. And as you build analytic apps, there's a lot of things that you need to take into consideration. It's not just about putting a dashboard into or a report onto a web page. It comes into keeping account of how do people access it, what level of tools and activity that makes sense for that person, and making sure that ultimately they're able to get the insights that that person needs. And there are many different types of experiences that people are going to expect. I guess the other part of that is that as you look at those different items, you will end up with drastically different end results. And this is honestly why keeping that UI UX as part of the development cycle from day one all the way to the end is going to help you be able to do that effectively.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the analytics that you're collecting while this is going on are what? I guess how users are interacting with the application, or what types of things are you
so it really runs the gamut. We just, when we say analytics, it's not like Google Analytics of usage or traffic. It's about, I have data and I need to let people work with it. So going back to some of those examples we were looking at before, on one end we had like oil and gas, for example. This is a large oil and gas company that has data coming in from different wells. Each well, the production levels, the drilling at each one's, all that data is coming back in, and they want to look at it a holistic view. They want to be able to see, where are we pulling out the most oil, where are there issues, how do we send in repairs, preventative maintenance. The other side, you also have like healthcare. Like, this is not about usage, it's about, I have X amount of patients coming in. This is our Medicare, Medicaid, like reimbursement rates. These are our readmission rates. And how do I analyze this? How do I give out the data to the nurses to understand, when I need to follow up to somebody? At the end of the day, it's about, I have data and my users need to be able to not only view it, but to be able to work with it.
Very good. Okay, another attendee wants to know how you deal with accessibility for people with disabilities in building these dashboards.
Yeah, it is difficult. We have done a lot of work here to be like fully 508 compliant and in all the components that we use. So for example, if you use a Logi dashboard in your product, we have things to be able to hook up to give those descriptions around each piece and help with that full 508 compliance.
Mm-hmm. All right. Very good. It looks like that's pretty much all the questions we have. So I guess now is as good a time as any to wrap up. So I would just, Amin, ask if you had any other final thoughts. I know you've given us a lot of information here today.
Oh yeah, no, that's about it. If you guys are interested in hearing some more about Logi as a whole, as far as what we do in the analytics space and other pieces, what we've done for with other software companies, be sure to just check us out online, logianalytics.com. We have live demos and a lot of other good information up there.
Excellent. Thank you. I'd like to thank Amin Mirdamati, Project Manager with Logi Analytics, for the presentation today. Thank you very much. I also would like to thank Logi Analytics for sponsoring today's webinar. And of course, I'd like to thank all of you attendees for hanging in with us for this half hour or so this morning. And until next time, again, I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times. So long.